Welcome to Meeting the Inconceivable, a podcast exploring Zen koans, dreams, and the creative life produced by Pacific Zen Institute. Pacific Zen has a legacy of preserving and reimagining the koan tradition to meet our own times. With a lively community of artists, innovators, and seekers of all kinds that extends worldwide, our mission is to create a culture of transformation through meditation, koans, the arts, and conversations about the deepest matters. In this episode, Roshi Allison Atwill explores the Bodhisattva's unique relationship with uncertainty as a healing balm for suffering. Describing how Zen Buddhism draws from the Mahayana tradition, in which the Bodhisattva path means helping to awaken all beings, Atwill notes this is not some future goal to somehow be achieved, but a moment-to-moment way of meeting every aspect of our own lives with sincere openness. Investigating what prevents us from meeting the moment we're in, Atwill describes the armoring and constraint that inevitably accompanies any sort of fixed view. Your awakening has no recipe, she says. It's uniquely yours to discover, as everything you've taken as a given falls away.
There's an ancient maple tree outside our kitchen window, and whenever I do the dishes, I can see this old, this handmade bird bath that we have perched on this rackety old table, and there's bird feeders there too, and it's a haven and a oasis for the local birds. And I've just loved the spring and early summer, watching particularly the fledglings as they realize that they're a bird. And they look sort of startled to realize that they are. They don't quite get it right all the time. But there's this one bird called a white-breasted nuthatch, and if you know them, they're just splendidly dressed in grays and blacks, and they travel straight up and down the trunk, just seemingly indifferent to gravity, kind of like a gecko, the gecko of the bird world. And there's been a couple of nuthatch fledglings that I've been watching the last couple days. And this afternoon, I was sitting in the couch in the living room and printing out some things for the talk tonight. And my partner comes in and he's got something in his hands. And I see I see this bird's head out of his hands, and he says, it's a nuthatch. And he had been in the barn, and the nuthatch, the fledgling, had somehow gone in there, who knows why. And it got caught and was banging against one of the windows and couldn't find its way out. And they're just incredibly fast birds. And so I asked him, well, how did you catch it? And he said, well, I just talked to it. And then it calmed down, and I put my hands around it and brought it out. Before I let it go, I wanted you to see it. And then he took it outside and he released it. So the Chan tradition has a beautiful image as the central image of awakening, which is the Bodhisattva of great mercy. And she or he or us, you are the Bodhisattva of great mercy. And it's an image of, some spiritual traditions will have a central image of like the Arhat, where you purify yourself and then you get the hell out of this problematic world. And in the Chan tradition, there's the image of staying until all beings are awakened. And it's not a future goal. It's a moment-to-moment appearance of the Bodhisattva. There's no future something where it's a continuing flowering of that expression, all beings. And in the Blue Cliff, there's a koan about this, where there's two students and they're friends or monks, and they're both studying with the same teacher, and one of the students a little bit older than the other, and they're just sitting around like people do at sesshin after a meal, and they start talking about the Dharma. And one of the monks says, "How does the Bodhisattva of great mercy use all those hands and eyes?" And in the legend, the Bodhisattva has an eye in the center of each hand. And you'll see right here, in this painting, there's an eye. I'd forgotten until this very moment that I actually painted my own eye. I remember trying to get a color so that it would be my eye color. But actually, your eye color is there right now in the center of each hand. And that's the action or the expression of the direct encounter, or I guess listening with our eyes to the feel of the situation that we're in. Someone asked me today about, how do you know how to paint? How do you know how to, did you teach yourself? Did you teach yourself how to paint? I can't remember what the question was, how they phrased it, but it's that every painting that I do, I have to actually teach myself how to make that painting because no one's ever made that painting. And I just don't know how to do it. It's being made. It's never appeared. So there's no way to know. You can't get a paint by numbers for a painting that doesn't exist. And it's the same with your awakening. No one can give you a list of things to do to get to your awakening. You yourself, because it's yours. It's appearing as you're living. And there's just no map for it. There's no recipe except the recipe that you've been given when you came into your life. So no one can know but you the way. Come back to our monks. How does the Bodhisattva of great mercy use all those hands and eyes? And the other student said, it's like reaching behind you for a pillow in the night. It's like reaching behind you for a pillow in the night. I understand, the other one said. What do you understand? All over the body are hands and eyes. That's well said, but it's only 80%. What would you say, older brother? All through the body are hands and eyes. And if you go to the Blue Cliff and read some of the commentaries that come after this, if your mind is doing this, all over the body is right. All through the body is right. And there's another image that comes through the verse where I think is incredibly beautiful. The net of jewels hangs down. The net of jewels hangs down in patterns, reflection upon reflections. And that's the net of Indra, where in each cross of the net, there's a jewel, and each jewel reflects every other jewel. And it's like if you look at your screen now where the corners cross, that's the net. That's the net of Indra. And each each place is a jewel, and each reflects every other jewel. So the Bodhisattva, Tess was talking about the direct encounter today and listening and according with the moment that we're in. It's another way to say the Bodhisattva is according with the moment that we're in. And then the one of the questions is, what prevents that? And what allows that, I guess, And uncertainty is maybe the primary healing balm of the Bodhisattva that she's guarding her little face, is the things that we're certain about, certain how someone else should feel when we come into an encounter. And the Bodhisattva might be interested in what they do feel. And the guarding that happens with my agenda, what I think should be happening, it's a kind of armoring. We can feel it when we go into an encounter and we've got, this should not be happening, or this should be happening, or you should be feeling something. And I think that certainty about what other people and or what I should be feeling, you don't have to get rid of that, because you are also the Bodhisattva to yourself. So if you find yourself armoring or grabbing for things, you just have to include that, and then the Bodhisattva appears. So our maps are our measuring of, or our comparing, or our certainty about things. So I'm going to read you a little poem. This is by Walt Whitman. When I heard the learned astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick. And that's the part of ourselves that we're exhausted by our plans, our agendas. The rising and gliding out, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself into the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. I looked up in perfect silence at the stars. So years ago, I started painting the koans. It wasn't something I had planned to do, but when I first encountered koans, these images started to just sort of rise out of the landscape and step forward and want to be assembled themselves in these paintings. And this one here, the one that you received in your art card, I thought I'd talk a little bit about it. I used to, when I first started giving talks, I would talk about the paintings, and then I would just hang like little Christmas ornaments, the Dharma, on the painting, because I was so ill at ease feeling that I could claim any understanding of the Dharma. It just seemed full of, I don't know, a kind of hubris. And so I would just sort of trick myself, and I would say, okay, well, I can talk about the painting, but then I won't feel so bad if I just every once in a while mention the Dharma. So this painting was done many years ago, actually. And during that time and during the years of making the koan paintings, I've been keeping folders with whatever happens during the painting, images that come to me or poems or experiences that I have that have to do with whatever, how the painting came to being. And I didn't, this hangs in our living room actually. And I remembered what some of the incidents were, but it was so long ago I'd forgotten a lot of them. So I went and pulled out the box with all these files in it. And I found the file for the Bodhisattva of Great Mercy. And I had great hopes for this file, thinking I could find my talk in it. And I was hoping it'd be nice and thick, but I lifted it up. I thought, oh no, there's only like 2 pages in there. So I opened it up. Well, actually, before I opened it up, there on the cover was, it's got all this writing about little notes about what these things are, as if to enough that at the time I thought would certainly jar my memory and I would not forget what they meant. And some of them, that's true. The stories came back. But one of them, it's this, I don't know if you can see, there's a blue frog here. I had no memory of that blue frog. It was like someone else had painted it. And on the cover of this, it says, frog dash, extraordinary frog rendition. So what comes to mind? And I thought, I have no idea what that means. And then, so I just forget about it. And then like 4 hours later, it suddenly comes to mind. The whole story just came back to me. And I don't know if you remember, but back in the Bush administration, there was a whole terrible thing of extraordinary rendition, they called it. It was like euphemism for kidnapping people they didn't like, and taking them, whisking them off to these secret prisons, and where they would interrogate them and, shake them down for the thing that they wanted from them. And I remembered that I guess it started when I was a child, when I have 8 brothers and sisters, and there were 4 of us that had one bedroom, the 4 girls, and we had bunk beds. And I was on one of the upper stories, and I had a window right next to my bed, which, because it was improperly built, it just didn't open very much, but I could open it a little bit. And right outside my window was a hedge, and tree frogs lived in it. And there was a sort of, every night there was a sound of the tree frogs, which was almost like, when Dave Weinstein chants in the morning, greeting. It's that kind of same sort of rolling mantra that the frogs were chanting a mantra every night. And I came to associate it with that same feeling of chanting a mantra. And many years later, I was living in a house in Santa Barbara where I just loved the frogs. I longed for the sounds of frogs. I wanted the sound of the frogs. And so I have a creek in my backyard, and there would be frogs there. But I wanted, my own frog, my own tree frog. So I had this, I would go hiking in the canyon near my house all the time, and there were lots of frogs there, lots of wild frogs. So I got this idea to kidnap one. And I had misgivings right from the start. And it's marvelous the way our lives were tangled in, were threaded through with impossible situations of uncertainty, of our longings and our passions and our aversions, and what we think we need to be happy. And I was pretty certain I needed a frog. So I hiked up the canyon, and I eventually found one on the sandstone, this huge sandstone boulder, and I caught it, and it was sort of struggling, and I put it in I had a sweatshirt, and I pulled my sweatshirt off, put it in the sleeve, and tied both ends, so it would have oxygen, it would be okay. And then came home, and I sort of was talking to the frog like my partner was talking to the bird today, and saying, I'm so sorry I hope you'll be okay. I'm going to give you a good home. But I felt a kind of the pain of, well, maybe it's got, a wife there or kids, and I'm pulling it away. I don't know. I just don't know if I should be doing this. And then I got home, and I released it into this little courtyard I had with lots of plants and lavenders and succulents and a hand-painted ceramic wall mural that I had painted myself. It was a really beautiful space, and it was open to the sky, and it had a gate, and it had plenty of space below the gate, so the frog could leave if it wanted to, which, made me both terrifically uneasy and assuaged my guilt slightly, because I figured it could just escape and go, and I had a creek in the backyard, so this plan worked out wonderfully. The frog, I would hear it at night, and I had a skylight in my bedroom, which I always left open, and it was right near the courtyard, so I could hear the frog singing, at night. And there was this beautiful, lulling chanting of the sutras. And then sometimes there'd be, sometimes it would stop, and I wouldn't hear the frog for a month, and I would just be in pain of grief of, I killed the frog. Or it escaped, and I just didn't know what happened to it. And then I'd be working on the plants in the garden in my courtyard, and suddenly I'd lift something up, and there would be it just looking up at me. And this went on for a long time, It lived there for a couple of years. It didn't leave. And then I was worried for it, because I thought, it's lonely. Maybe it's lonely, but it could leave. There were the frogs, in the creek. It could leave. But still, I had some doubts about this. And then one day I was working, and I was going through the plants, and I see the frog, but it's not my frog. It has slightly different patterns on it. And I think, oh my God, it's called a mate to it. And there were now 2 frogs in my courtyard. And then years later, I don't know what happened to the frogs, actually. I don't remember if they stayed or left, but that was years ago. And then it was about 2.5, 3 years ago that a debris flow, a fire actually, came and burned all the way from Ventura all the way across the Front Range, all the way to Montecito, and actually burned through that canyon. And then there was a debris flow which scoured out the creek. And when I finally was able to get back up there, there wasn't a single living thing left in that entire drainage. Nothing. And then about 6 months later, I went back up into that canyon with a friend, and the pool where I'd captured that original frog was, you couldn't even find it. It was unrecognizable. The whole canyon had been so altered. But I went up near that area, and I was looking in the ponds, and there was some tadpoles in there. And I was so moved because I'd been so worried that I started weeping. And I think it was the sorrow for everything that had ever been in danger, for everything that had ever been lost, for everything that had ever been captured and stolen. And not even now, still not knowing, was I at fault or not? So I think the uncertainty and not coming to a conclusion keeps me still immersed in the question and in the situation. That somehow coming to a conclusion of, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done it, it all worked out for the best. Either of those feel, first of all, not true. I can't know that. And also they seem to stop the Bodhisattva action. Any kind of certainty, you can feel it in yourself. When you've decided one way or the other, it's suddenly you've left the situation. The situation is now in a box on the shelf. I don't know. All through the body, hands and eyes. It was like reaching behind me for a frog in the night. So what else do I want to say here? I think the thing to say that it can feel at times like the conditions of our own lives are unfavorable to our own awakening or unhappiness. That you were born inside the very conditions for your own awakening. At this moment, you're in the center of it. And it's such a marvel to look at all your faces and to see you standing in the center of your lives, holding your own awakening in your own hand, and that no one else can know. No one else can walk towards your own true life than you. And I guess one could say that it's the closing of the heart and the opening of the heart, that maybe that is your guide. That when you feel the armoring and the closing, that itself is your own awakening appearing in its dark form. It's very close. It's pressing in on you. That's that feeling of constriction and being hemmed in. It's your awakening pressing in on you and pressing out of you. I think I'll leave you with a poem. When Lawrence Vanderpost one night in the Kalahari Desert told the Bushmen he couldn't hear the stars. He couldn't hear the stars singing. They didn't believe him. They looked at him, half smiling. They examined his face to see whether he was joking or deceiving them. Then two of those small men who plant nothing, who have almost nothing, nothing to hunt, who live on almost nothing, with no one but themselves, led him away from the crackling thorn scrub fire and stood with him under the night sky and listened. One of them whispered, "Do you hear them now?" And Vanderpost listened, not wanting to disbelieve, but had to answer, "No." They walked him slowly like a sick man to the small, dim circle of firelight and told him they were terribly sorry. And he felt even sorrier for himself, and he blamed his ancestors for their strange loss of hearing, which was his loss now. On some clear nights, when nearby houses have turned off their televisions, when the traffic dwindles, when through streets are between sirens and the jets overhead are between crossings, when the wind is hanging fire in the fir trees and the long-eared owl in the neighboring grove between calls is regarding his own darkness. I look at the stars again as I first did, to school myself in the names of constellations, and remember my first sense of their terrible distance. I can still hear what I thought at the edge of silence where the inside jokes of my heartbeat, my arterial traffic, the sea above high sea of my inner ear, myself tunelessly humming. But now I know what they are. My fair share of the music of the spheres and clusters of ripening stars, of the songs from the throats of the old gods, still tending even tone-deaf creatures through their exiles in the desert. So I guess I would say, just the final thing, that the deep longing for homecoming, which is feeling at home in my own life and in my own being, I think is what is at the heart of the Zen practice. And if you look around your room now and the patch of sky that you might be able to see and the wind moving through trees, all through the body, hands and eyes. So look inside and see if there's anything, any discoveries, anything to say. And I'll do the meeting and unmeeting. Christy.
Hi, Allison. Thank you so much for that. And just noticing that one of the things that I feel like is at the center of my attention right now is the uncovering of all the indigenous mass graves that are being found in Canada, but are just emblematic of sort of, as you were saying, all the people that have been, all the creatures that have been captured. And so as I'm holding that in the center of my life and really appreciating just your phrase about the opening and closing of our own hearts as a kind of navigation, wondering, so where's the light in that? Where do I see the light in that? And, I sure don't know. But I notice my tenderness and feel like that's part of my map. So
So a very, really beautiful question is when we see the suffering in the world, we see, the nuthatch fledgling caught in the barn, or the terrible story of the graves of the children, that you just, like, if you look now, when you said the kind of tenderness that one feels towards all suffering beings, just say more about that, about what that feels like just describe that a bit.
right now it feels like kind of a fluttering in my hands, like the way my hands are connected to my heart. But so I'm imagining being that little fledgling, actually, like the trembling and moving in a way that ripples out, and it makes me catch my breath. I notice I'm not really breathing when I feel that. So it feels like both open and closed at the same time.
And how does it feel being with all of us while this is happening?
It's a comfort to be in what in some ways looks like a flat, but it really feels like a circle. It feels like a connection, or the web of Indra is holding all of us up, and I feel like being held up by being together.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Christy. Michelle.
How does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use all those hands and eyes? And one of the great gifts of being in retreat is how easy it is to see how it happens through every one of you and me and everything. And it's beyond understanding, but I just wanted to point out that connection with not picking and choosing is one of the how does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use all those hands and eyes? It just avoids picking and choosing. And when everything is avoiding picking and choosing, all of that can flow, and it's easier to see. But it's there no matter, it's always there. Anyway, I'm just really touched by it, so wanted to share it. Thanks.
Michelle, earlier this afternoon, you were telling me a bit about the experience of that in the encounter with the students. So can you say a little bit about that? The not picking and choosing in the Bodhisattva.
Well, again, everything is it's taking place inside of a sort of an unfathomable mystery, but at the same time, like in the interview room, the Bodhisattva of great compassion is clearly at work, and it's everybody who comes in to see me is helping me and teaching me as something comes through me and is helping and teaching, and something is appearing in that moment that wasn't there before, and the action is happening through our interaction, and it's sort of being born. And this is going on all throughout the body, everywhere, all the time. But if I feel, it's easier to see and feel in retreat. And I find, like, as being someone who sometimes will speak out publicly, and I'll notice then how this thing I was trying to figure out how to express, I hear it, someone else says it. Someone else says just that thing, or just comes at it another way. And I realize, again, it's just, you just see how we're all part of the same net. And so let's see, is there anything else? It's there's this when I can see I see a glimpse of it, it helps me to have faith that it's also in the places where I can't see it.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Yes. I think I want to read to end with one short thing. I know, Carly, you've got your hand up, and I think we'll wait for that. This is John Muir, who, at a period in my life, he was sort of my patron saint. And he says, when we contemplate the whole globe as one great dewdrop, striped and dotted with continents and islands, flying through space with other stars, all singing, stars all singing and shining together as one, the whole universe appears as an infinite storm of beauty.
This morning, when Tess brought up that overheard conversation that she overheard on her walk, it was like hearing the call of little Jade for me. As I've been noticing the theme of the overheard conversation running through the whole little Jade story and Yuan Wu's awakening, and been unwinding the story and noticing along the way how at each point there's an overheard conversation. You know, Yuan Wu hears well, actually, even before that, Wu Tzu ends the whole story by saying, "I share your joy." That's Wu Tzu overhearing Yuan Wu's joy. It's an overheard conversation as Yuan Wu relates his joy and his experience to him. Yuan Wu's experience with the crow, listening to the sound of the crow, was the overheard conversation that Yuan Wu heard of the crow with the universe. The universe having a conversation with the crow that he overheard, right? Before that, it was the overheard conversation of Wu Tzu asking, not really asking, Wu Tzu just relates this overheard conversation that takes place between somebody and Zhao Zhou, where someone asked Zhao Zhou, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? And Zhao Zhou says, cypress tree in the garden. And Wu Tzu relates this overheard conversation, and it's the occasion of Yuan Wu's awakening. But before that, it was the overheard conversation of Wu Tzu and the official, where Yuan Wu overheard the conversation where Wu Tzu told the official the story about little Jade to begin with, that got Yuan Wu's attention, an overheard conversation of an overheard conversation. But I couldn't figure out how, I got kind of stuck at the fever. And I wasn't sure how the fever was an overheard conversation. And I believe it was the overheard conversation that happens in practice, where we overhear our conversation with ourself. And in the fever, Yuan Wu overheard the conversation between himself and Wu Tzu, and hearing it as an overheard conversation, heard it, which was the occasion for him to go back. And how the whole practice feels like a kind of cultivating the ability to overhear my conversation with myself. A Japanese teacher named Kodo Sawaki described meditation as the self watching the self, the self, right? Just watching all those levels, all those conversations, all those overheard conversations. And all the koans are overheard conversations we have, that we listen to and engage with, that help us hear our own overheard conversation. And as I was following this thread of overheard conversations, I found something that spoke to me about our practice and poetry and koans from John Stuart Mill, who made a distinction between poetry and eloquence. And he said, eloquence is heard, poetry is overheard. And how he talked about the way the poet is having a conversation with somebody else that we're listening to. But I think even deeper than that, the poet is reporting the conversation that they overhear within themselves, maybe. And Stuart says, eloquence is feeling, pouring itself out to others, courting their sympathy, or endeavoring to influence their belief, or move them to passion or to action. So people can be very eloquent and yet somehow not convincing. Whereas poetry is feeling, confessing itself to itself in moments of solitude and embodying itself in symbols, which are the nearest possible representations of the feeling in the exact shape in which it exists in the poet's mind. And it feels to me like he's describing the difference between sitting with someone who's talking to me about a koan very eloquently, but I'm not moved, and sitting with someone who, I am moved by. And how that's what my practice feels like when it's alive. And I think you probably know that too for your practice. Have a good evening.
To support these episodes or learn more about upcoming programs and retreats at Pacific Zen Institute, visit us at pacificzen.org. You'll find details on John Tarrant's Sunday talks, our Open Temple morning meditation, and our Zen Luminaries series featuring intimate conversations with scholars, poets, and teachers of Koan Zen. Thanks for listening.